This is For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan, a podcast about life, faith, theology, and the Bible, for the rest of us. Well, welcome, my friends, to For the Rest of Us with the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. I know I say it all the time, but you should be able to tell from the rip that I am not the Reverend Canon Megan Castellan. I'm just Adam Eichelberger. I work with Megan at the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. I was a lifelong Catholic. I'm still a relatively new, but not so new, we'll say certified pre-owned Episcopalian, and I'm just trying to figure this all out, and Megan's helping me do all of that. You can kind of think of her like my Zordon.
May the power protect you always.
And I am the power. And she is just helping me make sense out of everything and being patient with me as I learn more about life and faith through the lens of the Episcopal Church. Megan, what do you have for us this episode?
Today, I thought we would go back to the Anglican 101 stuff, because in the annals of very Anglican things that we have not yet discussed, we have not yet discussed the origins of the prayer book. And our favorite dude who wrote it, Thomas Cranmer, and he is a celebrated figure in our history. We've referenced it a lot, but it's a major enough thing that I thought we should go ahead and sort of like lay out the history of how the prayer book came to be.
This is good for me because as a recovering Catholic, much of my development when it comes to studying the Christian faith is like, there's everything that's Catholic, and then there's all of these uppity Protestants, and all these names are names that I know, and like some of them I know a lot about, some of them I don't know as much about. So this one is going to be a good lesson for me and hopefully for you listeners. All right, so fill us in. Tell us all about Thomas Cranmer.
Well, I want to say at the outset that the English BCP is like and yet also unlike the American BCP. If you are an American listening to this and you have a 1979 prayer book, I'm going to tell you now that the 1555 to the 1662 prayer book, which is the still official one in England and other places of the Church of England kind of first came, is very different than what we have. There are reasons for this. They are kind of amusing, but that's going to take up a whole nother episode. It has to do with, in the words of Leo McGarry, that time we opened a can of whoop-ass on the British at Yorktown. So I just want to flag that for you. But we still do inherit the idea of a prayer book in the vernacular. Our prayer book did descend from the early Cranmer prayer books. So our story begins with Henry VIII becoming concerned about his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. If you will remember from the last time we talked about this, or from the musical Six, whichever a source of history you prefer, Catherine had been previously married to Henry's brother, who had died, and then Henry had married her. So they sort of he had inherited his wife, something you did back then. And then Catherine was sadly unable to give birth to a male heir. Henry increasingly becomes convinced that this is because God is angry at him. Being a little bit of a narcissist, he becomes convinced that this must be because God is concentrating on him, Henry, and that God must be angry at him, and this is some sort of like elaborate divine punishment. So Henry's solution to this problem is that his marriage must be invalid in the eyes of God, and therefore he needs to divorce Catherine. We talked before about it, but it's not like Henry set out to be a church reformer. He really didn't like Martin Luther. He wrote a whole book about how Martin Luther was wrong and the Protestant Reformation was awful. He was awarded a title by the Pope for this. He did not think the reformers were good ideas. What he wanted was two things. One, to be in charge of the church, and two, to have a male heir. That was it. That was the extent of his vision. But in order to make the second thing happen, he needed to set a lot of dominoes in motion. At this time, our buddy Thomas Cranmer is a lowly professor at Cambridge. He's sort of interested in the church. He's just kind of a priest, normal priest, bopping around, not doing a whole lot. But he decides, literally in a pub one night while drinking with his friends, that it would be cool to help the king out with this annulment issue. And what he should do, again, drinking in a pub with his friends, what they should do is survey all the clerics in Oxford and Cambridge, all the kingdom theologians and professors, and write a book send it to the Pope, explain why there was some solid theological ground for divorcing Catherine. This would help the king and be a good thing for the kingdom. So they do this. Anne Boleyn's family finds out about it and befriend him. The king befriends him. The Pope does not. But he gets enough currency with Anne Boleyn's family and with the king that when the current Archbishop of Canterbury, when all this is happening, shuffles loose this mortal coil, Henry decides to appoint Thomas Cranmer as the new Archbishop of Canterbury. We're still under the aegis of Rome at this point. Everybody's Roman Catholic. This really confuses everybody because, again, Thomas had not been in the church hierarchy. He was not a bishop. He was not well connected. He was literally a priest bopping around in Cambridge, drinking with his buddies at this point. But he did have this clear willingness to work with the king on this tricky political problem. And again, Henry has two goals: to be in charge of things and to have a male son. And Thomas seems really well positioned to help him do those two goals. So he's appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, highest ranking church person in England. And his first years are really taken up with the annulment problem. He works on getting the annulment proceedings rolling. He works on how to explain this problem to the nation's clergy, who, again, are all Roman Catholics. So this is going to be a bit of a sell. He oversaw the annulment trial. He had to have public proceedings explaining why the marriage had to be dissolved. Henry and Anne Boleyn get married in secret, and they tell Thomas Cranmer about it 2 weeks later. He deals with that pretty well for somebody who was trying really hard to help them and then gets undermined in this way. But he, again, helps them to publicize their wedding, helps them to announce Anne's pregnancy. He's really, being a good company guy. Meanwhile, it's not clear at this point that Thomas Cranmer has a heart for reform for the church. He appoints some other reformers to high church positions. So he appoints a guy named Hugh Latimer to a bishopric. But he also tells other reformers that we know of to kind of sit down and calm down a little bit. He seems really unwilling to court conflict. Thomas Cromwell is also his number 2 at this point. So if you've watched like Wolf Hall, all this is going to sound familiar to you. And for a lot of this history, Cranmer is really comfortable in letting Thomas Cromwell charge in, get into the fights, make the hard decisions. Cranmer just seems to kind of want to hang back and, chill out. Pretty soon after Anne Boleyn has her daughters, she is then accused of infidelity. This is pretty clearly politically motivated, and again, she's not able to have a male son, which Henry decides is her fault. Cranmer does.
So now it's somebody else's fault.
Now it's somebody else's fault.
Yeah.
Cranmer does publicly defend her, which is interesting. He is one of the few to do it. He writes to the king and beseeches him to have mercy and to spare her. And he is one of the few court officials to publicly mourn her after she's beheaded. He is the one to take her confession. He walks her to the gallows. He is the religious figure to kind of be with her as she is executed. And he seems to actually do that out of a real sense of pastoral care for her. Meanwhile, Henry has broken the church from Rome. So now Henry is in charge of the Church of England. But again, initially, this does not include any sort of reforms. And when this happens, people got really mad. It's not like the regular pew sitters were chomping at the bit for their king to now be their kind of mini pope. There were rebellions in the churches in the north of England in particular. And again, Cranmer seemed perfectly content to let Cromwell go out and put down the rebellions. Parliament goes back and forth over a number of years, sort of deciding what they were going to say about certain aspects of doctrine, and Cranmer just decides to stay out of it. Henry and the other church officials that he has appointed start to push for saying the services in English. There are what's called prayer book rebellions, where in a number of churches, people would just absolutely refuse to say the Mass in English, and they would throw their books at the preacher and cause riots at the service.
It's better than wasting food and throwing vegetables, I guess.
You go to church, the preacher starts leading the services in English, you pick up your book and you just hurl it at him. Something to do. And so sometimes we forget, because we take it for granted, how big a change it was when the Church of England starts moving from a Latin Mass into a Mass in English. They didn't have a clear way to do this, which was part of, I think, why the rebellions happened. They had the Latin Missal, and the priests were told, just translate the prayers into English. There is a big gap of time between 1532, when Cranmer becomes the Archbishop of Canterbury, and when he issues the first draft of what will become the Book of Common Prayer in 1549. In between those two sets of years, the church and parliament is arguing back and forth, trying to figure out a way forward, and people are rioting in the streets. It was a huge mess. Also, Henry is over there like collecting and then shedding wives. So it's just kind of a disaster every which way. And again, it is tough to see from history, and scholars debate this all the time, what Cranmer actually believes himself. He seems to most of all want to stay in his job and not be beheaded, because people are getting off to right and left. He also seems to really ardently believe the right of the king to determine the religion of the kingdom. But we also know that he corresponded with the other continental reformers for decades. So he doesn't seem to have been a fan of Martin Luther, but people like Philip Melanchthon and Zwingli. Thomas Cranmer wrote for decades, and when they were being persecuted by the German princes, Cranmer invites them to have safe refuge in England. And he trades ideas, and he sends them drafts of prayers he's writing for the prayer book. He seems to be really interested by the reformers' ideas, and also somewhat hesitant about how well they're going to fly in England, because he's, on the one hand, intrigued by what's coming. On the other hand, he's watching England have riots over the audacity of saying the prayers in English. So one of the things that's always interesting to me about Cranmer is his, what I think is a practical streak, where intellectually he's interested in the new ideas, but he also has a pastoral sensibility of, well, can I get the whole of England on board with this? Or are they going to need more teaching? Are they going to need more time? What can I give to the people? Because this is a broader church than just me. He also has an interesting habit of continuing to work with people who decidedly disliked him. At one point, there was after the Anne Boleyn execution, a conspiracy of nobles denounced him to the king, told the king he was plotting against him, he was a traitor, blah, blah, blah. The king says, I'm bored with this. Thomas, you investigate. I'm going to go marry some more women. And he does investigate. He arrests the guilty parties, a number of whom were in the church. And the ringleader stays in jail for the rest of his life. But the rest of them, he rehabilitates them and then puts them on high-ranking committees in the church and just continues to work with them. Which, again, in a time period of significant upheaval and lots of public betrayals and beheadings and deep polarization in the country, this is a really unusual move. And when he rolls out the first prayer book draft, he does it to a committee that contains people who agree with the reforms he's rolling out, people who disagree with reforms at all, and people who think he does not go far enough. And he manages to kind of crowdsource it with all of them. The first Book of Common Prayer comes out in 1549, and the first pieces published are the Exhortation, which is this long speech the priest used to give, inviting people to communion the next Sunday, and warning them what would happen if they weren't properly spiritually prepared for it, and the Great Litany, which we talked about a few weeks ago. Once the first draft comes out in 1549, Parliament passes the Act of Uniformity, which says now that we have this, every Church of England church has to use this in public worship. So worship is again becoming uniform. And again, over some fairly violent pushback, right? Henry dies soon after, and his son Edward, they kind of dig up from somewhere. Edward, his very young son, takes over. At this point, Thomas Cranmer moves faster to implement actual reforms. So he seems to change some of the theology in the prayer book. In the drafts of the prayer book, you can see there's a shift in the Eucharistic theology in particular, from a sort of embrace of transubstantiation to an embrace of sort of memorialist ideas. And then it kind of shifts back in between drafts. And part of that seems to be which king is on the throne and what they're going to let him get away with. The prayer book rebellion continues to grow until Thomas Cranmer basically takes over St. Paul's Cathedral on July 21st and starts to preach a whole service about how it's unpatriotic not to use your prayer book. That if you're going to be a good English citizen, you're going to listen to your king and you're going to say the Mass in English. Gosh darn it. As the prayer book slowly starts to kind of infiltrate through the country, the next piece to be rolled out is the ordinal. So the pieces of the ordination service, which are helpful in giving the clergy sort of a hint of how the bishops and the king see their role going forward. He co-wrote the ordinal with Martin Bucer, who was one of those continental reformers. Bucer was a more ardent reformer than Cranmer was. Bucer thought the English Reformation was moving too slow. Even after the draft came out, Bucer denounced Cranmer and the English Reformation as being incomplete and not helpful. Meanwhile, Cranmer is working on three things: a wholesale revision of canon law, so all the rules governing the church in England, a statement of belief for the whole church to sign off on, and a whole new Book of Common Prayer that would incorporate the ordinal, the liturgy, the exhortation, everything he'd sent out before. This draft he sends to the continental reformers, Zwingli, Melanchthon, for notes. They mark it up. They suggest prayers, they send it back, and that's, again, why we see the 1555 Book of Common Prayer as being more Protestant in tone and in theology than the 1549 draft. It's going to kind of find a middle ground in the 1662 book, but there's a stark difference between the 49 and the 55 book. Eventually, Cranmer's statement of belief becomes the 39 articles, which are currently in the back of our prayer book. But some stuff happens. Before Cranmer can really get the revisions to canon law changed or get his unified statement of belief out there, the baby king up and dies. Before he does, he appoints Lady Jane Grey as his successor. There are movies about this weird period in English history, and this completely messes up the line of expected succession. So now we've got people mad about moving away from Rome. We've got people mad about all the divorces. And now we've got people mad about this random lady on the throne. And so when Edward dies, a lot of more fun rebellions start. And Cranmer, being a devout, no matter what the king says goes type person, supports Lady Jane. Meanwhile, Mary Tudor's forces are marshalling on the edge of the kingdom and are taking out reformer bishops because they've got a broad base of English Catholic support and Catholic support from continental Europe. So they start moving in. Cranmer, meanwhile, is still in London and performs Edward's funeral according to his new English language Book of Common Prayer. And during the service, he declares any rumor that he authorized the Latin Mass to return as absolutely false. And that week, he is arrested for treason against the crown because Mary Tudor takes London, arrests him, throws him in jail, throws all of his reformer bishops in jail too. Early in November, Cranmer is made to watch as two of the reformers he had appointed to bishops, Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley, are burned at the stake for heresy. They are burned at Oxford. They're three of the Oxford martyrs. He's made to be up front and watch. And he is imprisoned for another couple of weeks. We're pretty sure there was some interrogation happening because he recants. He signs a confession, taking back everything he's ever said about Reformation. He takes back what he says about saying the Mass in English. He takes back what he says about, there being different ways to understand the Eucharist. He renounces all of it. He accepts the Pope as the true heir of Christ on earth, and he publishes it. Normally, in an ecclesiastical trial, that would be enough to save a person from the death sentence, but Queen Mary, who's now the Queen, declares that Cranmer's crimes are so despicable and his influence upon the kingdom is so evil that there can be no mercy on earth for such a person. So he is also sentenced to death and to be burned at the stake in Oxford. When that happens, he recants his recantation. So he announces publicly that his recantation was false. He takes it back. And when he is burned, he voluntarily puts his right hand in the fire first to be burned because he says that is the hand that betrayed me and betrayed what I believe. This is the hand that signed his recantation. And so he also is burned at the stake, like Latimer and Ridley. And in the ensuing years, it's an interesting sort of publicity battle that happens. The English Catholics point to, well, he recanted, he fell in line, he became Catholic again. And then the Protestants are like, well, he recanted his recantation. And so it was really hard for either side to use him as a political prop because he just sort of didn't show up for anybody. His lasting legacy, though, was the prayer book. And the way it was written, the cadences of it have become an indelible mark on all of English literature, not just religious things, not just how we pray, but the idea that prayer should be accessible to every single person who is literate and not just this particular purview of the clergy, and also that prayer should be beautiful. one of Cranmer's sort of unique contributions are these one-line collects or one-sentence collects that we pray, and he really pioneered that form, that we, have a particular prayer form of talking to God in one extended sentence that has a particular flow and meter and rhythm and that is pleasing to the ear. And that sort of beauty that is held over from the Latin Mass was one of the things he preserved. It may be apocryphal, but Hugh Latimer at the stake was supposed to have said to Nicholas Ridley right before they went up in flames, was it, "Play the man, Master Ridley. Today we will light a fire in England that I trust will never be put out." And, in a lot of ways, we take for granted the idea of being able to pray in our own language and being able to talk to God in our own language. But it's important to remember sometimes that people died for that. People died for the idea of God being that accessible. And so that's an important thing to continue to value. And it's an important thing to extend to other people because our ancestors fought for it. We need to extend that same grace to other people.
Yeah. So there's a lot there
Yeah.
to unpack. One of the things that I've really grown to appreciate about using the Book of Common Prayer, and I'm going to admit that I'm still learning it, but just like a unifying method for everyone, regardless if they're ordained or not, to be involved in the prayer life of the church, in the liturgy of the church, that like these things aren't separated. And I mean, granted, it's the year of our Lord 2026. Like the days of that segregation between clergy and laity are kind of long gone, but still, even like harkening back to my Catholic roots, there is a little bit of that. And to see that we are all kind of unified in this is actually really cool. And I love, now most publishers do a good job of this, but I've encountered a few where like they get the page numbers wrong, or like the content of like the number of like what's supposed to be on each page number wrong. So like in my office, I have like a couple copies, and in one of them it's wrong, which is kind of a pain in the neck. But just the ability to be like, oh, like at our church, we have a worship bulletin every week, and everything is pulled in from the BCP in the book. My priest always says either page 5 of the worship bulletin or page whatever in the Book of Common Prayer, and I'm like, oh, I can just go right to that, and it's this unifying thing that kind of I can turn to whether I'm at church or not, and stay engaged with that life of the church. I really have come to love that. Like I said, I'm still learning, but it's helpful for me, and this gives me a lot of really cool context to understand all of this. That there's like, it's not just like one day everyone was like, we need a new book, and everyone's like, here. Like there's a lot more that's going on here than that.
Yeah. I mean, we literally have a guy in charge that we elect at general conventions every once in a while called the custodian of the prayer book, whose job it is to make sure the pagination is always correct and consistent.
Yikes,
and that
what a job.
translations are faithful across all the languages, and to handle digital rights and how it's published digitally, and that it's all coordinated. Yeah, like there's literally a guy. Or it could be a woman. I don't know that we've ever had a woman custodian of the prayer book, but like there's a guy. So every prayer book, if you open the front, it'll say, "I authorize this text, signed custodian of the prayer book," because like it's a thing.
Well, hold on. Now I gotta go look. Listeners, I just went back in my office/studio to find. Hold on, I'm verifying. Yeah, Juan Oliver.
Yeah, Juan Oliver. He was one of the liturgics professors when I was in seminary.
Look at that. Okay,
Yeah.
so this one's the good one. It's the other one. There's one with a black cover. That's the one that's all jacked up.
Yeah, I have in news that will surprise absolutely no one. I collect prayer books, and I have a couple like typo ones that I think are like really fascinating.
Shocking.
Of course, yeah, I know. But I have one that I found in Bruton Parish Church where the first 200 pages are just repeated after page 200 with no explanation, and then it goes to the end. So I don't know who the custodian was during that printing, but they were not doing a great job.
Slacker.
But slacker.
All right, so as we always do, we need to know your thoughts on things, Megan. And for those of us here in central New York, we are in that horrible time of year where it's false spring. Because what's going on is we're all waking up and looking at our phone's weather apps to see what the weather's going to look like. And yeah, it's going to rain, but like, look at that. This weekend, it's going to be in the 60s. It could get to 70, and we all get so excited. But I am wondering, it is March. We want to know, Megan, What is the one thing you're looking forward to the most as we slowly crawl away from winter?
Vitamin D. Looking forward to seeing the sun again. I read somewhere that the Syracuse, central New York area is the cloudiest place in the continental United States. We somehow beat even Seattle. Like, this is the cloudiest place with no sun through the winter, and I would believe it. Like, it's just there's no sun. The sun came out the other day, and I was like, "Why is it so bright in this room? Is the light on or something?" No, it was the sun. The sun had come out.
Yeah,
And I was
take
like, "What?
that, West Coast. We're better than you. Hey, guys,
The sun."
we're so glad that you stopped by for this episode. Do us a favor on your way out the door. If you haven't already, make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you leave us a rating and a review. Tell a friend about the show. We can't wait to talk to you next time on For the Rest of Us. Thanks for stopping by and checking out For the Rest of Us. If you like the show, leave us a review and a rating. Make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend. We hope to see you again next time. For the Rest of Us is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York.